Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Katie Galvin. Katie, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. So on my show, one of the things I love to do is I love to invite my guests to introduce themselves. And so I would love to hear from you in 30 seconds or less. If you could just tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Katie Galvin. I am a writer. I have been working on a novel for about 8 years now, and I am finally starting the long-winded publishing journey. Aside from being a writer, I am an avid runner. I love matcha lattes, and I am also an auntie. I have 5 nieces and 1 nephew who I adore very much, and they definitely keep me busy.
Wow, that's amazing. So you gave me a lot of threads to pull. I'm gonna resist the temptation to talk about your beverage of choice or some of the other things. I want to talk about the writing. So you've been working on your book for 8 years, you said, and
8 years, yeah.
you're getting into the publishing journey now, right? So
Sure.
talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that you've learned over the course of your 8 years working on this book.
Absolutely. Well, I will say matcha has been my best friend through this. I know that caffeine is a must for all writers, and I made the
Yeah.
transition to matcha about 3 years ago, and I swear there's a good correlation with my writing and productivity. But anyway, so I have been working on a legal thriller for about 8 years. And what I have learned through this journey is that the way a book starts is not always how it ends. When I
Mm.
originally started this novel, it began truthfully as a crime fiction. And then through research and through character development and through plot threads, it landed up being a legal thriller. And I'm not a lawyer by trade, but I really learned that staying true to the course of the story is very important, not always finishing at the time you want to, you know?
Mm.
So that's been kind of a hard lesson, honestly, because it took me a lot longer than I wanted it to take, to be honest. But I feel that I've been very true to the story, despite how long it's taken me.
Oh, that's really cool. So when you say legal thriller, in my mind, I immediately go to like John Grisham novels. Am I on the right track? Is that the kind of world you're operating in, or is it something totally different?
No, you're absolutely right. So it's actually interesting that you say that because I have been pitching agents, and one of the biggest struggles I had, to be honest, was kind of fitting my novel into a specific genre.
Mm.
And I originally thought that my novel was a commercial fiction. Basically, it was available to anybody. It wasn't really, fitting into what I considered to be niche genres. And then the more I was talking to agents, they said, okay, well, is it procedural? Does it take place in a courtroom? And they kind of gave me all these check boxes. And I said, oh, yeah, that's it. That's it. So it landed being a legal thriller. So you're right on the mark with the Michael Conleys and the John
Okay.
Grishams and all of that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that is one of my favorite genres of books. So I will look forward to reading yours once it's
Oh,
available. That's
awesome.
awesome. Okay, so talk a little bit about your kind of journey that landed you 8 years ago starting to write. Is this something that you always had as a goal or an idea, a dream that you wanted to do, or is it something that you kind of grew into? Or talk a little bit about your evolution as a writer, how you got to the point that you decided to actually start writing this book.
Sure. So I've always been artistic and I've always been a creator. I began at a young age actually in singing lessons in theater. And after doing theater and being involved in productions, I realized I enjoyed the storytelling aspect the most. So when I turned about 19, 20 and I went to college, I really started to enjoy a lot of the creative fiction classes I took that were really honestly not really part of my agenda for getting a degree. They were really just extracurriculars. And I took these classes and I really enjoyed it. And I was really caught up and lost in the amount of time I was writing stories. And then this particular novel, I had a kind of personal experience that actually had happened, and somebody I knew was involved in the world of, mental health and struggling with that. And
Mm.
I think as a writers, we often sometimes feel that we want to dive deep into, big issues. And that was really something that was important for me. So I started researching, mental illness in the United States, and then from there, I interviewed a lot of wonderful, brave people who were so open and kind to me and sharing their stories. And there was a common theme amongst everybody I interviewed, which was they all struggled with their medication. And so from there, I really started to dive into the pharmaceutical industry. And that is really where the book kind of started to take shape and how it kind of evolved into a legal thriller. So it's been a journey, to say the least. It's been a journey, but definitely an evolution as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I read something recently. I don't know if this is true or not, but somewhere out on the internet, I saw the statistic that 80% of Americans say that they want to write a book, but something like, less than 1% ever actually do it. I think there's tons of reasons for that, but one of the big reasons I think is people are just they have a lot of hurdles, whether it's fear of failure or whatever that they have to overcome, and sadly most of them never do. But I'm curious, from your perspective, have you had challenges either leading up to writing or once you got into it? What are some of those big kind of hurdles that you've had to overcome, or challenges that you've wrestled with throughout your journey?
Absolutely. So I was really scared of people reading my work. And in many ways, I felt for the first 4 years of writing this book, I was somewhat of a gatekeeper. And I would talk about it and I would tell my friends, and they would
Yeah.
all say, "Well, when can we read it? When can we read it?" And I don't know what it was. I think if I were to try to take a stab at this, I think I was so invested in the way people were going to respond to it. So I didn't feel confident enough yet to hand it over to people to possibly critique, to hate, whatever, to love. And eventually I kind of detached from the story and I detached from the book. And then I said, okay, I really need people to read this because I spent a lot of time on it. I want feedback. I want to hear how people are responding and reacting to it. So, to be honest with you, that was really a hard thing for me. And in order to overcome that, I joined a lot of writing communities. And in these classes, the first 5 minutes, you were given a writing prompt and you would have to write a quick story within, in that 5 minute time period. And then you would have to share the story with the class. And of course, it's a quick little blurb. No one can really get too far into a story with that amount of time. But it was the first time I actually read something of mine out loud and then saw people's reaction to what I wrote. And some of it was good. It was really encouraging. It was a great group of people who said, wow, I'd love to learn more about where you're taking that story, or what a cool character. So, yeah, I will say for me, the biggest challenge was definitely overcoming the whole people reading it, which you need readers if you're going to write a book, right?
That's the funny, yeah. So I'm a little further back in my journey. I've finished the first draft of my book, and I recently shared it with a writing coach. And there's this weird feeling when before I sent the email off to her, I was kind of like, I don't know. And it's just, I remember thinking like, but I'm writing this so that people will read it. So why am I so like, so gun shy about sending this off and having it? But it's a vulnerable thing, especially when you feel like you've invested so much in it, and you don't know how people are going to react to it. But
Oh, absolutely. And
um,
there's so much of yourself in the story. And I
for
didn't
sure.
really actually realize that until I went back and reread a lot of my drafts, where I was thinking, yeah, I'm detached from this. And then you reread and you're like, wow, no, actually, I mean, there is, the author's journey is very much involved in the novel's journey as well. So yeah, it's super intimidating. So I completely understand the feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm curious about your process. So another thing that I've kind of come across is I've started to talk with a lot of people who are kind of at the beginning stages of writing. a lot of them struggle with, getting into a rhythm or finding a routine or, a habit or a process that works for them. I'm curious, and I like to ask folks on this show, like, what are some of your kind of tried and true, like if you were coaching someone who's brand new and wants to write, like what are some of those things, whether it's a tool that you use or, a time of day or, any type of advice or encouragement that you would give, something that's kind of tactile, something that's tangible that someone could take and try, that has helped you in your writing process.
Big believer in writing prompts. So
Mm.
I try to maintain a pretty solid writing routine. I usually write best in the morning. So I will generally, get up early in the morning. And, sometimes I'll dive into maybe the project I'm working on. But what I've been loving to do lately is writing prompts. And I've been using writing prompts for a long time, but I almost see them as the stretching for running in a way. Before you go for a run, you want to stretch.
Oh, that's good.
So I've always utilized writing prompts, and they're all over the internet. I mean, there are some great ones. Writer's Digest has some good ones. I most recently saw one the other day that said, you're on the freeway, you see a wedding cake in the middle of the road, write a story.
Oh,
And
nice.
what I love about the prompts is that they take you out of the genre that maybe you're used to writing in. So I'm not a romance writer at all. I tend to stay in the thriller zone. But I saw this wedding cake story, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna take a stab at a little romance and see how I do. And it's just a great way of just getting your brain, kind of going. So I'm a big believer in writing prompts for sure.
I love that. I love that analogy about stretching too, because it is like it kind of preps you and gets you ready for, the next big thing, whether, in running, if
Sure.
you're about to run a race or whatever, like it's a good idea to stretch first and get yourself in the zone, get yourself prepared. And I think there's probably a lot of freedom in what you're saying about, hey, you're kind of stepping outside of your main project that you're working on, and you're writing on something that's totally different genre, totally different kind of style, maybe. And I imagine a little bit of freedom in that, of not feeling, I don't know, feeling like you're able to just kind of explore and just celebrate and enjoy the art of the journey instead of actually, the work of your book, I guess. If that makes sense. I don't
Totally.
know.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And it's also helped me get out of writer's block as well. I remember when
Yeah.
I was writing my current novel, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I was reading a lot of court documents, and after a while, it felt a little okay, like monotonous. And I would use these
Mm.
writing prompts that would take me, into completely different genres. I remember I wrote a random science fiction short story. Again, I would have no one read these, but but they were just fun to experiment and try something different while you're focusing on maybe a larger goal or larger scaled project.
Yeah. I love that. I love it. So if you've listened to my show at all, I'm really big on encouragement. I think I've become convinced that like that is a critical ingredient that almost everyone needs if they're going to pursue anything big, whether it's writing a book or starting a company or whatever. Um, there's going to be seasons and moments where, you know, the the challenges are going to be so much that if you don't have someone in your corner or somebody kind of cheering you on, encouraging you, it's probably going to be enough to crush it. So I always ask folks,
Yeah.
if you could think about kind of your journey, has there been a person or a moment where somebody has kind of shared something with you, or even maybe something that they've done that's been an encouragement? I'd love to hear if you have an example of something that's happened, that's kind of spurred you on in that way.
Yeah. So I can first off say that I am very fortunate that everybody in my family and my friend circle is super encouraging. And I firmly believe they are the reason I finished this book, because even on days I wasn't writing, so many people would ask, hey, how's it going? Are you hanging in there? So, right off the bat, I'm very fortunate that I had that great support system. From a writing perspective, though, I joined a group. I had moved from Boston down to New Jersey, and I wanted to get to know people and build a writing community down here. So I joined a group down here, and I actually was able to meet a fellow writer, and she had published, I think, about 5 books. And she was really great. She said, I had told her I'd been working on this book for so long, almost 8 years, and I got into the rhythm of trying to make it too perfect. where at some point, it was done, it was finished, it really just probably needed to be edited. And she said, Katie, at some point you have to let go of the book you're working on so that you can expand and open your horizons to all the other projects that are waiting for you. She's like, it's never going to be perfect. It's really, this is a testament to the writer you are now, but now you have to, move on and move forward so you can start maybe working on other projects that you're interested in. And that really resonated with me because I do feel that for me personally, at least as a writer, I can kind of get into this perfectionist mindset, which is interesting because I'm not a perfectionist in any other part of my life. But when it comes to writing, I really wanted this book to be perfect. And,
Yeah.
she said it's good. You just gotta let go of it and see what it does on its own. Kind of, cut the string a little bit. So that for me was really great because now I feel I actually write a little bit faster than I used to because of that advice. I can kind of say, all right, is the story what it needs to be? I'm good.
That's great. That's good advice and good perspective. That's a hard lesson to learn though, I think, because I
Yes.
the other day or a couple weeks ago when I sent my manuscript off to the writing coach, I posted something on Threads and I had a couple people chime in, and it almost felt like what I imagine it would feel like of dropping your kid off at college. Like the story's ready and it's everything's there, but I didn't quite feel ready to do it. So, and a lot of
Right.
people chimed in and said, yeah, that's kind of what it's like. So,
Yeah, right,
but
right. It's true. You
it's
need
good.
people
But
pushing you.
just like in sending your kid off though, like that's an important milestone. It's something that you have to do, and it leads to good things oftentimes. So, yeah, that's great. That's a really good perspective. So, if you were, so again, this show, and I think you know this, but this show is to encourage and inspire new writers to get that idea out of their head and onto the page. And um, if you were talking to someone who is kind of in that situation where maybe they've got an idea that they've kicked around for years, or they've just started to write, but they're feeling like, oh man, this is harder than I thought, or I'm not as good as I thought, or whatever. Um, I'm curious if you would have any advice or encouragement that you would offer to someone who's brand new, just getting started, but feeling like it's a little bit of a slog. How do you encourage that person?
That's a great question. I am a big one on celebrating the small wins.
Mm,
So if you're just starting out, I would say make a benchmark, maybe making the first chapter, make that a goal and celebrate that win. And if it's your first draft, celebrate that win. I was on Instagram this morning and I saw a friend of mine, she posted the famous the end photo that all
yeah.
of us do, right? When we finished a draft. And I love that. And I love that authors do that because we all know how difficult it is to get to the end in capital letters at the end of 80,000 words.
Yeah.
And I always thought to myself, you know what? This is great. You should be celebrating every win along the way. And even on the days where you're drudging along, if you've had writer's block for a month and then you have a week where you're really writing well, celebrate the win. I think sometimes we all think that the end goal here or the sign of achievement in writing is that you're a traditionally published author. And I don't really agree with that at all because I think it's did you finish the book? That's an achievement. How many drafts? That's an achievement. Did you have people who you impacted with the story? That's an achievement. So I am a big one on celebrating the wins however you can. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so big. I mean, I tell people that all the time. Like there's so much that goes into this, and if you think that success is only landing on a New York Times bestseller list, like that's a high bar, and there's a lot of variables that go into that you can't control. But if we change success and frame it as, hey, I'm going to sit down and write, and I'm going to try to write 300 words today, like even that, like celebrate even that, because those small wins, like there's a whole psychological thing that happens when you start to string together consecutive victories like that.
Mhm.
You start to convince yourself that, okay, I can do this, and you see the progress, and then as that happens, you continue to build and accumulate, and before you know it, you finished your chapter, and then you finished your manuscript, and then you're on to draft, the second draft or whatever. So yeah, I think that's huge. And I think it's so important to track your progress and celebrate those wins, because they're hard to come by, but they're really important, even the
Oh
small
yeah.
ones. So
And they
I
can
think
be
that's great.
the highest of highs, really. I mean, I remember when I finally finished what I am calling my final draft on this book, it was emotional. I committed a certain amount of years, and it wasn't so much emotional that I finished. I think you can understand this too. It was emotional because I was looking back on how much time I had committed to it. And
Yeah.
I said, wow, that's pretty cool that I stuck with this for this many years. I don't know why, but I did. but it was cool, and I when I look back on the writing journey, I think that's actually more my proudest moment. Even if I do land a traditional publishing deal or whatever it is, I have to say that that moment of saying, "You know what? I stuck with this. I learned something new and I committed for these 8 years." It was a great feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you where you are in the journey now? Are you like pencil down, finished writing with this book? And now you're like, where, remind me where you are in the journey and kind of what's next for this one. And then the follow-up question is like, have you started working on something else, or what's next for you?
Yeah, so I am done with this project, that the 8-year project, and I am now in the process of building out my agent list,
Okay.
developing my synopsis, having the query, all of the, first 50 pages edited, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And as far as my writing endeavors go, I actually have been starting my a second novel that's a work in progress. And it's really interesting, kind of going back to developing the routine and celebrating the wins. I was amazed at how much faster I was able to write this book than the last one. And kind of going back to the advice that my mentor at my New Jersey writing group gave me, it was interesting how those 8 years taught me a lot about the process, or at least my process, and how I was able to, really learn from what I had done in the previous novel and apply it to this new one, and how you can move faster, and so yeah, it's that's also been a cool part of the journey, to kind of see how you develop your own skills and your own craft.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Do you have any examples of those things that you learned the first time around that you applied when you were writing the second novel?
Yeah. So I tend to write what I'm calling research heavy novels.
Okay.
And what I did the first draft is I tried to do all of the research first, and then I would write the novel. And where I think that wasn't working for me is that I didn't really have the story paced out yet. I'm not a plotter at all. I definitely am more of a pantser and kind of just write as I go. So what I
Yeah.
did this go around was I just wrote out a draft, and it was very much, bare minimum foundational draft only. And then once I started to realize where I wanted to take the story, that's when I was able to kind of divulge into all of the resources that I needed for the research. So I was able to better understand which books I wanted to read, where I wanted to, investigate, or what articles I wanted to read. And that really cut down on some of the time for me. And it was fun. The research was actually really cool because I was able to kind of focus in on, you know, specific things rather than have this, global research project that I was kind of overwhelmed by.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So okay, you mentioned that you like to leverage writing prompts. You talked about some of the writing groups that you've connected with that have helped you. I'm curious, are there any other whether it's books or podcasts or websites or any other resources that you've leveraged that you think might be helpful for other people to check out?
Yeah, so I love this book, and I know a lot of people refer to it, but I really do love it. It's called The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Moss. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I've not.
he's a literary agent, a very well established one, and he wanted to write a book for authors to try to help them better develop their craft when it comes to the emotional side of writing. And his whole point is that when people open up a book, they're looking for an emotional experience. They're looking for some sort of escapism. And he felt that a lot of novels he was reading were lacking some kind of an emotional piece, that he just wasn't always connecting with a lot of books for that reason. So he goes on this, you know, novel length book, honestly, of writing exercises, of elaborating on where a specific paragraph in a published novel maybe could have been improved. And it's really cool. And he also allows you to put your characters into specific situations, and he'll say, okay, ask your protagonist this question. How are they feeling? Things that you wouldn't really think about. And he calls it I think it's the third layer emotion, where it's like, okay, maybe your character's happy, maybe they're anxious, but what's the emotion that they're feeling that they're not showing? And it's really interesting. I have to say, it's definitely very cool for developing characters that people can connect with emotionally. So I would say that was a book that really helped me. And then I love getting people to review my work, just from a now, here I went from being someone who didn't want anyone to read her work to now having people read it and want their feedback. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you've ever used Upwork, but it's a great way of finding copy editors or developmental editors who you can just kind of, ping ideas off of. You do have to pay for the service, but many of them are decently affordable, and they can really help you kind of maybe see things that you can't really see yourself because you're so in the thick of it.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Thanks. I'll include that in the show notes. The book is The Emotional Craft of Fiction. That's the name of
Mm-hmm.
it, right?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll include that in the show notes. That's great. Um, oh man, I just had a question that I wanted to ask and now it's gone. That's good. That's great podcast, by the way, when that happens.
Well, we know it. We're writers. Our mind is going all over places, right?
Here it is. Here it is. It's back. I'm not going to edit any of this out, by the way. No, the question is, and this one is not in the pregame notes that I sent you, and
Oh boy.
it's probably for a lot of people. This is a hard question to answer. So I'm just going to go for it and put you on the spot. What is your favorite book, and what makes it so great?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love that
And the
question.
the hard part for people is picking one, right? Usually,
Mhm.
but
Yeah. So I actually have the book. I have the book. So this is I hate kind of being a cliche, but I always answer that he's my favorite author, and I will elaborate on why. So I'm a big Stephen King fan.
okay,
I, for some reason, don't write horror. I don't read horror other than him. It's not my genre, but I love the way he writes. And in many ways, I almost feel like he's kind of cursed me a little bit, because now, I don't know if you feel this way. Whenever I read a book now, I read it more as a writer than a reader. But I love the book,
yes,
The Outsiders, that he wrote. And the reason I love The Outsiders is because first off, he has great characters. But in that book, he has managed to somehow have so many different storylines, genres. It's part crime fiction, it's part horror. There's some psychological, spiritual elements to it. And he really is just a master of that kind of emotional connection and making you feel a certain way. And I remember I read that book, I think, in maybe 2 days. And I still think about it. That's how I know I really, really liked a book. I'm still thinking about it. And they actually did a TV show version of it. It didn't do it justice. You can skip it. But yeah, The Outsiders by
yeah,
Stephen King. I absolutely loved that book. So yeah, I have a lot of his that I really enjoy. But when I think of like a book, like I said, it really, got me thinking. And again, it's not a genre I really read in. So that's why I also think about it, because he kind of, pulled me out of my reading comfort zone and brought me into this world that I was really fascinated by.
awesome. So you led me to a follow-up question. So you mentioned the TV series that was not as good as the book. I'm a pretty
Yeah.
firm believer that that's almost always the case. The movie's never as good as the book. The TV show's never as good as the book. But I've had people push back on me with some rare exceptions. So I'm curious, from your perspective, true or false, the movie is never as good as the book? And if you have exceptions, what is an exception to that?
Well, I'm with you all the way. I always think the book is
Okay.
better than the movie or the TV show. But I am a big Michael Conley fan, and I have enjoyed the Bosch series and the Lincoln Lawyer I think the Lincoln Lawyer is on Netflix, and I think the Bosch series might be on Prime. So that, I would say, would be my exception. But that's probably it. That's probably the only one. I'm
All
you know
right.
I'm pro
Fair
I'm pro
enough.
book. I'm pro book.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Katie, this has been a lot of fun. I have just one last question, and this one's an easy one. How can people connect with you, follow along with what you're doing? Do you have a website, social media? How do people get in touch?
Sure. So I am pretty active on Instagram. So my handle is _ Katie Galvin _. And I love to engage with people on there. I'm a big one on DMs, collaborations, anything. I love to hear about people's writing journeys. So definitely welcome that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'll be cheering you on. Looking forward to hearing more about your book.
Back at you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.